And so they continued into the cave, along a small stone path that runs along the right bank of the stream that flowed out. The water's flow trickled echoing in the air as the sound of the forest they were passing from became quiet, with the cave taking them in. In only moments, with Gregor in the lead before he turned a corner, as Jonah lit a lantern to cast light into the primary tunnel from which the dwarf was turning, he spotted, in the distance, the ever-faint glisten of a razor-sharp arrowhead drawn back in the grasp of a bow aiming at him. The arrow released, and the sound of a small clutch of 3 giant rats, each the size of a small dog, screaming as they leapt for the stout figure, launched Gregor's companions of 3.5 days into action. This is though only after one of the rats had grabbed in its leap, piercing in with its teeth Gregor's hearty throat, pulling him hard to the ground with the weight of the other 2 who impacted him as the arrow from the goblin passed by, finding no purchase in the flesh. Leif sprung into the cave with a single flame igniting at the end of his index finger. He shifted past Gwenlwen, who only turned to notice the commotion with Leif's movement, and began loading his crossbow for the sound, and moving to the corner Gregor had turned, unleashing the onslaught upon him. Jonah and Ammo rushed in after Leif as the glyph he scribed into the air with the flickering energy at the tip of his finger became solid for a moment before shattering and releasing from a point deeper within the outcropping room from the main tunnel that holds the stream, a wave of magical mist that expands radially for 20 feet before fading. The wave of white passed over Gregor and the rats, taking him to the ground. Just as he began to fall, each of the rodents, with his descent, become detached from him, magically passing into a deep slumber. Seeing the goblin in the back and hearing Leif's voice expressing the arcane words to bring into power his sleep spell, Gwenlwen rushes forward and past Gregor before the dwarf had even fully hit the ground, unconscious from his wounds, and releasing a bolt for the goblin, unsuccessfully finding its purchase in the pile of rubbish the small figure had found its perch upon. Laying his crossbow upon the ground, the snow owl chooses to pull from his back a spear he had brought with him. Seeing the dwarven victim begin to fall only as several other non-goblins take his place, and some with the ability to use magic, the goblin turned to run, attempting to climb the chute of rocks and rotten foodstuffs he had shot from. As he did, Gwenlwen hopped up to behind him and, lunging with the spear, pierced the feral humanoid's back, killing it instantly, before turning back to Gregor, who gets a potion of healing that was given to the group by Astral, poured down his throat. Gwenlwen skewered one of the sleeping rats in the same moment that Gregor threw himself forward, coughing and sputtering, having been saved from the brink of death by the skittish Vulpine Ammo. Gathering the supplies the goblin had been keeping in a heap for himself, and waiting for the shirtless dwarf to smash the remaining 2 sleeping rats in anger at their bringing him to such a point, they continue deeper into the cave, following the stream with Jonah in the lead, holding aloft a lantern of light. They moved forward in a nearly silent way, but in a cave with no light found that holding a lantern so that they themselves could see alerted more goblins in a further chamber of their approach. The sounds of stone being freed cracked through the tunnel before being overtaken by the sound of rushing water. A trap had been released, sending a torrent of backed-up water for the group, knocking Jonah, Gwenlwen, and Ammo from their feet, while Gregor stood unmoved by the wave, and Leif leapt to the wall, clinging to it just long enough for the water level to fall to its normal level once more. Relighting his lantern only long enough to throw a rope over a rope bridge that had come to be overhead of them, connecting 2 higher-up tunnels, Jonah threw a card from his pocket that disappeared a short distance from his hand before a loud, sharp pop snapped out 30 feet ahead of the group, the way the stream was flowing from. Before this, the group regained their bearings. They could hear deeper in the cave a high-pitched, gutturally chittering of goblins having a conversation and laughing, to which the reappearing of the light silences them and fills their strange voices in the goblin tongue of the region with worry. A second release of stones falling free from where they had been put together, and again a release of water torrented toward the group after Jonah's sound cracked into the air. The whole group had prepared this time, and they easily avoided getting swept away a second time, while letting the lantern get doused a second time to give the impression of them being whisked away before they worked together to climb upon the bridge. All were on the bridge except for Gregor, who had served as an anchor for Ammo and Jonah, as Gwelowin simply flew up and Leif used his natural feline aptitude for climbing to reach the upper level, when a goblin looked to see if the intruders, as they saw the group, were gone, noticed the glow of the enchanted rock Gwelowin was holding, and yelled back that the group was still in the cave. Another fight ensued, with one of the goblins revealing an ability to cast magic, which, with the flick of their wrist, released a blade of ice that exploded in a burst of cold that brought Gwelowin and Ammo to death's door themselves. Luckily for the group, Jonah had on him the second of the 2 potions of healing that Astral had provided them, and rushing to Ammo, fed the Vulpine the curative liquid before joining the others in tracking down the goblin spellcaster, hog-tying her and bringing her to be dealt justice for the harm she had caused to Ammo and Gwelowin, but only after learning about the location of the remaining goblins within the cave, who at the time should have been sleeping. As Ammo was one of the ones downed, Jonah offers to let him deal the justice, but the hesitant, quiet white Vulpine couldn't bring himself to harm the goblin that was tied up to be helpless, and that was staring at him with large, sorrowful eyes. So, in Gwelowin's stead, who had had their condition stabilized so that they might wake up on their own accord after an hour or so, Jonah drove the blade of a sword he had taken from the goblin with the rats into the goblin he had tied up, killing it instantly. Reclaiming his rope, Jonah leads the others to the room that the spell-casting goblin had been found in, and they tuck her in to let their heartbeats steady and their muscles relax for a short rest. But unfortunately for them, the cries of terror and pain had awoken 2 of the goblins that were sleeping, and they approached to investigate. But with a single card drawn from his pocket that he keeps adding to after he uses each card, with a deck in a hard leather-bound box on his hip, Jonah created a dust in his hand and blew it towards the curious creatures, creating the same effect that Leif had with his spell, causing both feral humanoids to drop to the ground asleep, where Gregor took delight in removing their heads, like the vermin he sees their species as, more so than the others in his companionship. After what seemed to have been an hour, Gwelowin's eyes forced themselves open as Ammo, kneeling to his side, moved water with slight movements of his hands over key points of the owl's body, somehow causing the water to glow, and the wounds Gwelowin had received to heal. All of them feeling a bit less worse for wear, they set themselves toward where any remaining goblins may be sleeping, knowing that even though they are humanoid in appearance and able to speak, goblins are more closely akin to vermin, in that only 2 surviving can lead to a new nest forming, which would mean the chicken heists would only begin again later on down the road. Thusly, they crossed the old rope bridge to the far other tunnels of the cavern they have been venturing through, where either through the extent that the other encounters had tired them out, or through the simple shared desire to no longer have to be where they are, doing what they are doing, They loudly progress into the chamber where 4 goblins had been sleeping, waking the creatures, who spring into action, to which the group responded in equal aggressive actions in return. A goblin waking on the far side of the room grabbed his bow while moving to check the source of the noise, and seeing the group of what to it were intruders, he drew back an arrow and launched it into the dwarf Gregor, who had taken the lead of the small band of adventurers in their stepping through the tunnel, striking him in the shoulder as Gwellowen skipped past the others from his place in the back while loading his crossbow, so that once he got just past Gregor, he was able to, at the first goblin he was able to see, the one that was at that moment releasing the arrow for the dwarf, release the bolt to strike the creature, and with a powerful wet meaty thud, the short pointed rod of wood knocked the goblin from its feet, killing it almost instantly. The impact hastened another goblin from the point deeper in the cave where the first had shot from, causing it to draw its arrow as it ran out, firing at Gwellowen, who felt the sharp twang as it dug into his flesh. Jonah ran forward, ducking past the arrowhead for the snow owl Erkakora in his group, and getting to the base of the short cliff that raised to a section of cave floor the archer goblin was standing on, and throwing up a lasso, caught the goblin's legs, pulling it from its feet. In the same moment as he moved out of Jonah's path, Gregor shifts to a goblin that was sleeping against the wall near the tunnel his group had come in from, but finds his swing to be wide, allowing the goblins to avoid it without issue. In response, the goblin presses a dirty, dull blade for the dwarf, slicing him when a projectile of water comes from a separate hallway that leads down to the stream, striking the goblin powerfully, revealing where ammo had moved, showing him to have shifted into one of the positions of the strange dance he had been regularly practicing. The goblin shirked away for a slope up to the higher floor level in the same moment that another goblin, who was sleeping next to him, leapt, stabbing Gregor before joining the first, both escaping any retaliation through the sporadic nature of their attacks and movements. The encounter comes to a sudden close, though, as Leaf, who had been scribing the same glyph into the air that he had used on the rats, released its power onto the goblins that had gathered close together, washing over them the familiar white magical mist that caused the 3 remaining alive to find their way to their knees, laying down and drifting into a deep sleep. From there, the group, mostly sure they had explored the extent of the cave, and having eliminated all of the feral humanoids within it, began separating the different items that they had found amongst the possession of the goblins, choosing what to take with them and what to leave behind, as Gregor took pleasure in ensuring that the sleeping goblins would never again awake. Moving to the cave entrance, where the stream trickles slowly out, Emma runs to grab 3 skulls that the group had found in the pile of refuse the goblin with the rats had perched upon, knowing them not to be goblin skulls, and they set out to return to Golland.